The 900-year peace is over. Galactic declare war, but humans just laugh. Part 5. The New Order. The negotiations took 31 days. That was fast by galactic standards. Treaties between major powers had historically taken years, sometimes decades, to finalize. The 900-year peace itself had taken 4 years of back-and-forth argument before anyone had agreed to sign it. But 31 days after Ambassador Sori had placed a data chip on the Council's podium and walked out of the chamber, representatives from every major spacefaring species in the known galaxy were seated in a room together, working through the language of a new agreement. General Do-hyun was not present for the negotiations. He was still on Earth, where he had been since the morning the Dranathi fleet appeared. He had not slept much in those 31 days, though he was good at hiding it. When the final session was scheduled, Sori sent him a message asking if he wanted to attend. He replied that it wasn't his place. Negotiations were her job, and she was better at it than anyone he could name. He said he would watch the summary feed from his office, and to let him know how it went. She sent back a single word: typical. He sent back, accurate. The agreement that emerged from those 31 days was nothing like the 900-year peace it was replacing. The old treaty had been built on a simple framework. Each species stays in its territory, keeps its military within defined boundaries, and agrees not to start anything. It had worked, mostly, because no species had felt strongly enough about changing it to risk the consequences of breaking it. That calculation had just changed permanently. The new accord, formerly called the Galactic Research and Security Framework, though most people simply called it the New Accord, was built on a different foundation entirely. It was built on the understanding that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, that the shift was not going to reverse itself, and that the most rational response was to figure out what that meant for everyone and plan accordingly. What it meant practically was this: Earth would provide security guarantees to every signatory species. Not dominance, security. There was a difference, and Sori had spent a considerable amount of the 31 days making sure that difference was clearly written into every clause of the document. Earth was not claiming leadership of the galaxy. Earth was not demanding territory or tribute or political authority. Earth was saying, "We will keep you safe. In return, you will share knowledge with us equally, contribute to joint research, and agree to bring disputes to a council where every species has an equal voice." It was, in the opinion of several political analysts who wrote extensively about it afterward, an arrangement that only made sense if you trusted the species offering it completely. Whether the galaxy trusted humanity completely was a complicated question. But whether they trusted humanity more than they feared what humanity could do was a simpler one. They signed. The Dranathi signed first. Their senior council representative, the same elderly figure who had sat in silence after Sori's address, signed without making a speech. He simply reviewed the document, confirmed every clause, and put his mark on it. Afterward, when a journalist from the Galactic Network asked him why they had agreed so quickly, he said, "Because we started a war we did not finish, and we prefer to deal with the consequences honestly rather than extend them." It was a more graceful answer than most people expected from the Dranathi, and it earned them a small amount of goodwill that they did not entirely deserve, but probably needed. The others followed over the next several days. The last to sign was the Veth Collective, not because they had objections, they had no objections, but because their signing process was complicated and required confirmation from 7 separate administrative bodies before a representative could formally commit. Sori had known this would take extra time. When the final Veth confirmation came through, and their representative added their mark to the document, the chamber erupted in the closest thing to celebration that a room full of 14 alien species could produce. A complicated noise that sounded like nothing in particular, and somehow meant everything. Rena watched the signing ceremony on a screen in the command center, and allowed herself to exhale. She had been managing the operational side of things for the entire 31 days, coordinating with colonial commanders, monitoring the Drenathi fleet's withdrawal, keeping communication channels open across 17 systems, and making sure that the considerable military apparatus that humanity had spent centuries quietly building remained in a state of readiness without doing anything provocative. It was the kind of work that required constant attention and produced no visible results, and she was very good at it. When it was over, she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Dohan came in 20 minutes later. He had watched the signing from his personal office. He looked the same as he always did, slightly tired, completely controlled, not particularly celebratory. "It's done," he said. "It's done," Rena confirmed. He nodded. He looked at the screen, which was now showing the council chamber in post-signing mode, representatives talking to each other, aides moving around with documents, the organized chaos of a major diplomatic event winding down. "Good work," he said. "I didn't do anything," Rena said. "Sori did all of it." "You kept everything running while she did," Dohan said. "That's not nothing." Rena accepted this with a small nod. In the archive beneath Seoul, Dr. Dawn Hana was already working on something new. The new accord had created a joint research coalition, every species contributing scientific knowledge to a shared database, with Earth serving as the primary custodian. It was an enormous responsibility and an even more enormous opportunity, and Hana had been thinking about what it meant before the document was even finalized. For 900 years, humanity had studied the galaxy in one direction, looking outward, gathering information, building a picture of everyone else from the outside. Now the galaxy would be contributing actively. The amount of knowledge that would flow into the Coalition database in the first year alone was, by Hana's preliminary estimates, more than humanity's xenobiology division had collected in the past 2 centuries. She had prepared 3 new research proposals before the ink was dry. Her first proposal was on a species called the Marin, a deep space-dwelling civilization that had signed the new accord but was very poorly understood. They communicated through methods that humanity's sensors could detect but not fully interpret. Hana wanted to fix that. Her second proposal was on the biology of long-duration fold space travel, which affected all species differently and was relevant to anyone who needed to move military or civilian vessels across large distances. Her third was something more personal, a comprehensive history of the 900-year peace, reconstructed from all available sources across all species, because she believed that the galaxy had never fully understood why the peace had held as long as it did, and that understanding it was important. She sent all 3 proposals to the Coalition's new administrative office within an hour of the signing. In Busan, Teo was doing something that, on the surface, looked very little like weapons development. He was designing a transit hub. Specifically, he was designing the core infrastructure for a fold space transit network, not military, not armed, but open to all species under the new accord. The same technology that had allowed humanity to fire weapons across multiple star systems simultaneously could, with significant redesign, allow civilian vessels to travel between systems faster and more safely than any existing method. It was engineering work he had been thinking about for years, in the quiet parts of his mind that weren't occupied with defense projects. Now, finally, there was a reason to do it properly. Bomi was helping him. She had transferred from the Fold Space Artillery team to the Transit project the day after the signing, because the mathematics were interesting and because she felt, as she told Teo over coffee, that she had spent enough of her career figuring out how to break things and would like to spend some time building something instead. Teo understood completely. The first transit hub would take roughly 12 years to build. The second would take 8. After that, as the technology matured, and the coalition developed shared construction capacity, the pace would accelerate. In 100 years, a blink of time by galactic standards, there would be a network connecting every inhabited system in the known galaxy, built on technology that had started as a weapon and become something else entirely because the species that built it had decided the galaxy deserved better. None of this was announced with great ceremony. It was just work, and humans were good at work. In the weeks after the signing, as the new accord began to take practical shape, and the first joint research teams started forming across species lines, the footage of Do-hyun's laugh continued to circulate. It had become something more than a viral moment by then. It had become a kind of symbol, though people disagreed about what exactly it symbolized. Some saw it as proof of human arrogance, which they found troubling. Some saw it as proof of human confidence, which they found reassuring. Some saw it as the laugh of a species that had been quietly prepared for exactly this moment for 900 years, and found that deeply worth thinking about. The correct interpretation, had anyone been able to ask Do-hyun directly, was simpler than any of those. He had laughed because 4,000 warships had appeared in his solar system, and his first thought, his genuine, honest, immediate first thought, had been, they don't know. Not fear, not anger, just that simple, clear recognition. They don't know what we've built. They don't know what we've learned. They don't know what the last 9 centuries actually were. And that thought in that moment, with the Dranathi fleet blocking out the sun, and an alien admiral telling him to surrender in 72 hours, had struck him as genuinely, deeply funny in the specific way that only the truth can be funny when it arrives at exactly the right moment. He never talked about this publicly. He was not the kind of man who explained himself. But Rena had been in the room. She had seen his face. And long after the new accord was signed and the Dranathi fleet was gone, and the Joint Research Coalition was publishing its first collaborative papers, and Teo's transit hub was under construction in 3 systems simultaneously, she sometimes thought about that laugh, about what it had contained. 900 years of quiet preparation, summarized in 11 seconds of footage that had changed the galaxy's understanding of what humanity was. Not a young species anymore, not a peaceful one exactly, or at least not peaceful in the way the galaxy had assumed, as if peace were simply the absence of war, rather than the presence of readiness. Just a species that had been paying attention for a very, very long time. And when the moment finally came, when the ultimatum arrived, and the ships filled the sky, and the galaxy expected fear, what had come out was not a declaration of war. It was a laugh. And the laugh, as it turned out, had been enough. We weren't sleeping. We were waiting. General Do-hyun, address to the Joint Coalition Assembly, 2947. The 900-year peace is over. Galactic declare war, but humans just laugh. Part 4. The laugh heard across the galaxy. Nobody knew who leaked the footage. It appeared on the Galactic Information Network at 0612 hours, roughly 2.5 hours after the first Dranathi shot had missed everything it was aimed at, and 43 destroyers had been quietly removed from existence. Whoever posted it did not use their real name. They used a handle that translated from Galactic Common into several different languages in several different ways, depending on which translation system you used. The most common translation was something like, a friend. The footage itself was simple, 11 seconds long, no audio beyond the ambient sound of a busy command center. It showed General Do-hyun standing at his console, watching Admiral Kova's ultimatum play on the main screen. And then it showed him laugh. Not a polite laugh, a real, slow, disbelieving laugh, the kind that starts in the nose and works its way out before you can stop it. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth. He shook his head. He had the look of a man who had just been told something he found genuinely, deeply funny, and was being polite enough not to let it go on too long. 11 seconds. Within 3 hours, it had been viewed 9 billion times. The Galactic Information Network, the sprawling, ancient, endlessly complicated web of data sharing that connected the known galaxy's inhabited systems, was not usually prone to viral moments. It was too big, too slow, too fragmented across species and languages and cultural contexts. What was funny to one species was baffling to another. What was moving in one culture was offensive in 3 others. The network had existed for over 2,000 years, and in that time had produced, by most estimates, fewer than 100 truly universal moments. The 11 seconds of General Do-hyun laughing at the Dranathi ultimatum became one of them within a day. It spread first through human networks, where the response was immediate and largely joyful. The particular kind of joy that comes from seeing someone else react the exact way you wanted to react, but were too nervous to. Then, it hit the alien information networks, where the response was more complicated, more thoughtful, more unsettled, because the laugh itself was not the frightening part. The laugh was just a laugh. What was frightening was the context. A military commander of a species that had just been given a 72-hour ultimatum by a fleet of 4,000 warships, the largest military deployment in the galaxy in over 3 centuries, had responded not with alarm, not with desperate calls to allied species, not with emergency cabinet meetings, but with a chuckle. And then he had told the enemy admiral to wait. And then, 6 minutes into the actual shooting, 43 Dranathi destroyers had ceased to exist. The laugh was not arrogance. That was the part the galaxy spent days trying to process. Arrogance was when you didn't know the odds and didn't care. What Do-hyun had done was look at 4,000 warships aimed at his planet, and laugh because he knew something that the 4,000 warships did not. That was confidence so deep it had become a kind of calm. On the Veth homeworld, a planet of researchers and analysts who prided themselves on reading situations accurately, the footage ran in a continuous loop on every public screen for 48 hours. Discussion programs ran for days. Experts argued about what the laugh meant, what it signified about human psychology, what it implied about human capability. The consensus, eventually, was that it implied a great deal. On the Dranathi homeworld, the response was different. The footage was briefly suppressed by the government's information office, then leaked anyway through 17 different back channels, then watched by approximately 90% of the population within a week. The reaction was complicated. There was anger, of course. A human general laughing at the pride of the Dranathi Empire was not something that sat easily. But underneath the anger, there was something else. A quieter, more uncomfortable feeling that nobody in the Dranathi political class wanted to name directly, but that most ordinary citizens could identify. It was the feeling of realizing too late that you had made a serious mistake. Meanwhile, Ambassador Sori was preparing to travel. She had been Earth's primary diplomatic representative to the Galactic Sovereign Council for 11 years. She was not the most senior diplomat Earth had ever produced, nor the most decorated, but she was widely considered the most effective, not because she was charming or eloquent, though she was both, but because she had an exceptional memory, a complete intolerance for being lied to, and a way of saying exactly what she meant that left very little room for misinterpretation. When Do-hyun's office contacted her and asked if she was ready to appear before the council, she said yes immediately. She had been packed since the fleet appeared. The council had requested a meeting. This was, historically, what the council did when something had not gone the way they planned. They requested meetings. They issued formal statements. They formed committees. They asked for explanations. The process was slow and elaborate, and deeply familiar to anyone who had dealt with galactic politics for longer than a year. Story arrived at the council chamber 17 hours after the Drenathi fleet's opening strike had failed. The chamber was old, built from stone harvested from 6 different worlds, lined with seats designed to accommodate the physiological differences of 14 different species. It had seen centuries of arguments, treaties, declarations, and negotiations. It smelled faintly of the particular combination of atmospheres that 14 species exhaled when gathered in an enclosed space. The council members were all present. That was unusual. Normally 2 or 3 were represented by delegates. Today they had all come personally. Sori walked to the center of the chamber, stood at the speaker's position, and looked at each of them in turn. She was not nervous. She had faced this room before in difficult circumstances, but she had never walked into it holding what she was holding today. Under her arm was a small case. Inside the case was a data chip. She set the case on the speaker's podium, opened it, and placed the chip on the surface. Then she looked up at the council. The United Earth government asked me to deliver a formal response to the Sovereign Council's declaration of war, she said. Her voice was clear and even. This is it. She gestured to the chip. That chip contains the complete technical schematics of every major weapon system, defensive array, and military technology that Earth has developed in the past 900 years. She let that settle for a moment. We're sharing it freely. No conditions, no trade agreements, no treaties, just information. The chamber was absolutely silent. We are not sharing it as a threat, she continued. We are sharing it so that every member of this council can understand, with complete clarity, exactly where Earth stands, so that there is no ambiguity, no room for miscalculation, no possibility of someone in this room thinking that what happened yesterday morning was the extent of what we are capable of. She looked at the Drenathi representative specifically. He was not Admiral Kova. Kova was still in his command vessel, doing very little. This was the Empire's senior council member, an elderly figure who had the particular stillness of someone trying very hard not to show emotion. Yesterday morning, Sori said, you fired everything you had at a secondary outpost with a skeleton crew. They activated 1 defensive system, 1, and your opening strike accomplished nothing. That system is the 14th most capable thing we have currently deployed. She paused. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. The Drenathi representative sat with it. She did not raise her voice. She did not make dramatic gestures. She stood at the podium and delivered the facts the way a teacher delivers a lesson, clearly, without cruelty, because the goal was understanding, not humiliation. Though humiliation, in this case, was probably unavoidable. When she finished, she left the chip on the podium and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, 14 representatives of 14 different species stared at a small data chip and did not speak for a very long time. Outside the chamber, in the corridor, Sori exhaled slowly. Her personal aide, a young man named Junho, who had been with her office for 3 years and was constitutionally incapable of hiding his feelings, fell into step beside her. How do you think it went? He asked. Sori thought about it for a moment. They'll spend 2 days analyzing the chip and confirming that it's real, she said. Then they'll spend another 2 days arguing about what to do. Then someone will propose a negotiation framework. Then we'll negotiate. And the Drenathi fleet? It's already moving, she said. Not toward us. Away. She had gotten the update on her communicator while walking out of the chamber. The fleet had begun a slow withdrawal from Earth's system an hour ago. 4,000 ships, retreating in good order, trying to look like it was a strategic decision and not a retreat. Junho was quiet for a moment. Did we win? Sori considered the word. We demonstrated that we couldn't be beaten, she said finally. Whether that's the same as winning depends on what happens next. Across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, The footage of General Do-hyun laughing was still spreading, still being watched, still being discussed, still making people ask the same question in 100 different languages. What did humanity know that everyone else had missed? The answer was spreading too. Slower, more complicated, harder to compress into 11 seconds of video, but spreading nonetheless. The answer was everything. Humanity had simply been paying attention for a very long time to everything, quietly, while the rest of the galaxy looked at other things. And the laugh, that small, disbelieving, deeply human laugh, was just what happened when 900 years of patience finally had a reason to smile. The 900-year peace is over. Galactic declare war, but humans just laugh. Part 3. First contact with consequences. The first shot came at 03:47 hours, Earth Standard Time. Commander Yura had been awake for 19 hours straight when it happened. She was stationed at the Mars Defense Outpost, a facility that looked, from the outside, like a modest research station. Low buildings, a few communication dishes, a handful of docked supply ships. Nothing that would make an enemy look twice. That was the design. That had always been the design. Yura was 38 years old, compact and precise in the way that people who work in small spaces tend to become. She had spent 12 years at the Mars outpost, first as a systems engineer, then as a tactical officer, and finally as the outpost's commanding officer. A position she had accepted not because she wanted rank, but because nobody else understood the outpost systems as well as she did. She knew every relay, every failsafe, every hidden layer of the facility the way a musician knows a complicated piece, not just the notes, but the spaces between them. When the Dranathi fleet made its move, she was sitting at her primary console drinking cold water and watching their formation shift on her display. She had been watching it for 6 hours. She had not blinked much. The fleet split exactly the way she expected it to. The main body stayed above Earth. A secondary force, about 300 vessels, still an enormous number by any measure, broke off and moved in the direction of Mars. Standard Dranathi procedure. Secure the inner system first. Eliminate the secondary positions before the enemy could use them for flanking. Textbook. Predictable. She had read about this pattern in a tactical document written by Hana's department 9 years ago. Yura set down her water. All stations, she said quietly, activate. The word went out across the outpost's internal network. In rooms below the surface, rooms that did not appear on any public schematic of the facility, equipment came to life. There was very little sound. These systems had been designed to run quietly. A soft hum. The low pulse of power moving through reinforced conduits. A series of green indicators appearing on Yura's display one by one, like stars turning on in a clear sky. The Dranathi fleet closed to firing range. Admiral Kova had given the order himself. He had watched the Mars outpost on his tactical screen for hours, and concluded, as most Dranathi commanders would have, that it was a minor installation. The energy readings were low. The visible defensive structures were minimal. He sent 300 ships because that was what protocol required for the secondary strike, not because he expected resistance. The energy volley they fired was enormous. Hundreds of beams, synchronized, all aimed at the outpost's surface. In terms of raw power, it was enough to level a small moon. Yura watched it come on her display. The beams moved at the speed of light. On the screen, they appeared as hundreds of thin lines, converging on her position. She watched them the way a person watches a storm through a window, present, aware, but not afraid. She pressed one button. The planetary refraction grid had taken 63 years to develop. It was not a shield in the traditional sense. It did not absorb or deflect energy the way most defensive systems tried to. Instead, it bent space in a very thin, very precise layer around the outpost, creating a geometry in which incoming energy simply curved away from its intended path and dispersed harmlessly into space. The principle had come from Fold Space Research. The application had taken 6 decades of engineering work and 3 complete redesigns. But it worked. Every single beam missed. Not deflected dramatically, not scattered in visible explosions. They simply missed, curving away smoothly and disappearing into the dark behind Mars, as if the outpost had never been there at all. On the Dranathi fleet's targeting systems, the readings were incomprehensible. Their sensors showed hits. Their visual systems showed nothing. Kova stared at his screen. The outpost was still there, completely undamaged. His entire opening volley, 300 ships firing at full capacity, had done nothing. On the outpost, Yura opened a direct channel to the Dranathi fleet. She kept her voice calm and clear, the way she kept everything. "Your turn is over," she said. Then she gave the second order. The Mars outpost was not primarily a defensive installation. It was primarily a relay point, specifically a targeting relay for the Fold Space Artillery Network that Teo's team had spent 11 years building. The outpost itself didn't need to fire anything. It just needed to exist, survive the first strike, and confirm coordinates. Which it had. Across human space, in 14 separate locations, spread across 6 star systems, Fold Space artillery platforms received the targeting data from Mars and began their firing sequence. The process took 41 seconds. There was no visible buildup, no charging sound, no glowing barrels, no warning. One moment the Dranathi ships were in formation. The next moment, 43 of their destroyers ceased to exist. Not destroyed in fire and explosion, the way battles looked in old war films. Simply removed, struck at the structural intersection point with such precise force that the vessel's integrity collapsed faster than any visible reaction could occur. Clean, surgical. The Dranathi fleet registered the losses before it could process what had happened. Kova's command vessel shook as the shock waves from the collapsed ships radiated outward. His crew shouted readings at him from all directions. 43 ships gone. No origin point detected. No incoming fire observed. Nothing on sensors. The losses had appeared from nowhere, struck from no direction that his instruments could track. He had never encountered Fold Space artillery. No species in the galaxy had ever used it in combat, because no species in the galaxy had built it. He opened a channel to Earth's command center. Do-hyun answered. He looked the same as he had 12 hours ago, calm, unhurried, a man who had not been surprised by anything that morning. "Admiral," Do-hyun said, "you've had a look at what we can do. I want to give you a moment to think before we continue." Kova's 4 eyes were wide. "What did you fire at us?" "There was no incoming." "We know," Do-hyun said simply. There was silence on the channel. "You have 3,957 ships remaining," Do-hyun continued. "We have not yet used our primary systems. We have not recalled our colonial defense fleets. We have not activated the arrays in the outer systems. What happened in the past 6 minutes was our automated response network running a standard confirmation sequence." He paused. "We haven't actually started yet." Another silence. Longer. On Earth, in the command center, Rena was watching the Dranathi fleet's formation on the main display. Something was happening to it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ships were changing their positioning. Not advancing, not retreating in a tactical pullback, just shifting, uncertain. "They're losing formation discipline," she said quietly. Do-hyun nodded. He had expected it. The Dranathi military culture ran on confidence. When a show of overwhelming force failed to produce the expected result, commanders began second-guessing. Ships began moving based on individual readings rather than coordinated orders. The formation, already weakening, started to develop gaps. Every gap was noted. Every new position was logged. Back on Mars, Yura watched her display update in real time. She had not fired a single weapon. Her station had not launched a single ship. She had pressed one button and answered a channel. In return, 43 enemy destroyers were gone, and the most powerful military fleet to appear in this solar system in recorded history was visibly rattled. She picked up her water, realized it was still cold, and drank it. Her communications officer, a young man named Junha, who had been with the outpost for 2 years and was trying very hard not to look like he was amazed, turned from his console. "Earth Command is asking for a status report. Tell them we're fine," Yura said. "Tell them the grid performed within expected parameters." She thought for a moment. "And tell them we could use fresh coffee when this is over. The supply ship is 3 weeks late." Junha stared at her for a moment. Then he turned around and sent the message. In the Galactic Sovereign Council's secure observation chamber, a remote station positioned at a safe distance from the conflict to allow the council members to observe events in real time, there was complete silence. 14 representatives from 14 different species sat in their seats and watched the same data feeds the Dranathi fleet was watching. 43 destroyers, 6 minutes, 0 human casualties, 0 human ships deployed, 0 human weapon systems observed firing. The council representative from the Veth Collective, a species known for being calm and analytical under any circumstances, turned to the representative beside her and said something that was later translated into 40 different languages and shared across the galaxy's information networks. She said, "What have we done?" It was a good question. The 900-year peace had ended 6 minutes ago, and in those 6 minutes, the galaxy had learned something it had not known before. Not because humanity had been hiding it exactly, but because nobody had thought to look. Humanity had not spent 900 years keeping the peace. Humanity had spent 900 years getting ready. The 900-year peace is over. Galactic declare war, but humans just laugh. Part 2. The history they ignored. The archives were kept 3 kilometers underground. Not because humanity was hiding them, at least not entirely. They were underground because the facility needed to stay at a constant temperature, because the data systems required isolation from surface interference, and because, honestly, nobody had thought it was worth moving them somewhere more convenient. The archive had been there for over 400 years. It had outlasted 12 different governments, 2 global restructuring events, and 1 very serious attempt by a junior senator to have it demolished and turned into a transit hub. Dr. Hana had worked there for most of her adult life. She was not a soldier. She had never held a weapon, never commanded anything larger than a research team of 6 people. And her idea of a high-pressure situation was a grant deadline or a failed experiment. But she was, without question, one of the most dangerous people on Earth, because she knew things. Specifically, she knew things about every major spacefaring species in the known galaxy. Things they had never bothered to share with humanity, and things they had no idea humanity had quietly figured out on its own. When the alert came through that morning, and her personal communicator buzzed with a priority message from the United Earth Command, Hana was already in the archive. She had been there since before sunrise, cross-referencing a new batch of deep space behavioral data on the Dranathi. Not because she had known the fleet was coming, she hadn't. She had been doing it because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was her day for Dranathi files. She read the alert. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of the archive for a long time. Then she pulled up everything she had on Admiral Kova. There was a lot. Humanity's practice of studying alien species had started, like most human habits, out of simple curiosity. In the early years after first contact, back when the galaxy had introduced itself to Earth with a mixture of condescension and mild interest, humans had responded the way they always did, to something new and fascinating. They had started asking questions, taking notes, running tests, building theories. Other species found this mildly amusing. Humans were young after all. Young species always went through a phase of being enthusiastic about everything. The assumption was that they would settle down eventually. They did not settle down. 900 years later, Earth's Xenobiology Division alone employed over 2 million researchers. The Behavioral Science Department had published more papers on alien psychology than every other species in the galaxy combined. The archive beneath Sol contained complete biological profiles on 47 known spacefaring species, including their exact physiological vulnerabilities, their neurological responses to specific stimuli, their historical patterns of decision-making under pressure, and, in the case of 6 species who had been particularly difficult to study, extremely detailed notes on how their militaries behaved when they thought they were winning. The Dranathi were well documented. Hana pulled up Kova's file specifically. He had been an admiral for 60 years. His tactical record was strong by Dranathi standards. He had won 3 border conflicts and suppressed 2 colonial uprisings within his own empire. He was regarded across the galaxy as a competent, experienced commander. His preferred strategy was the overwhelming show of force, bringing more ships than necessary and making the enemy understand through sheer numbers that resistance was pointless. It had worked every time he had used it. Hana made a note in her log. Then she opened a separate file, one she had compiled over the past 20 years, titled simply Dranathi Gravitational Sensitivity Study. The Dranathi, like all species that had evolved on high-gravity worlds, had a very specific vulnerability to rapid gravitational fluctuation. Their inner ear equivalents, complex organs buried deep in their skull structure, were extraordinarily sensitive. A sustained gravitational pulse at the right frequency didn't need to kill them. It just needed to make it impossible for them to think straight. Earth had built 17 gravitational pulse arrays over the past 140 years. They were disguised as geological survey equipment. Hana sent the file to General Do-hyun's office with a short message attached, in case you need the manual. Meanwhile, in the deep engineering district of Busan, Teo was already at work. He hadn't slept. He hadn't gone home after the cafe. He had walked straight to his lab, badged through 4 security checkpoints, and gone directly to the project he had been overseeing for the past 11 years, a fold space artillery platform that existed, as far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, not at all. Fold space travel was nothing new. Every major species used it. You bent space, you moved through the bend, you arrived somewhere else. Simple enough in concept, horrifyingly complex in practice, and something that had taken humanity about 200 years to fully master after first contact. What humanity had done differently, what no other species had apparently considered worth trying, was weaponize the fold itself. A conventional weapon fired a projectile or energy beam through normal space. It had a maximum range limited by physics and distance. A fold space weapon fired through a fold, meaning it could, in theory, hit a target in another star system as quickly and as accurately as hitting a target in the next room. Teo had spent 11 years making in theory into in practice. The last test, conducted 8 months ago in a remote system that nobody visited, had been successful. He stood at his primary console now and ran the calibration sequence. His team of 12 engineers worked around him in focused silence. Nobody needed to tell them what was happening. They had all watched the broadcast. They all understood what it meant. One of his younger engineers, a woman named Bomi who had joined the team 2 years ago and was terrifyingly good at spatial mathematics, looked up from her workstation. Teo, if they push inside the 30,000-kilometer threshold, do we engage? We wait for orders, Teo said. And if the orders take too long? Teo glanced at her. Then we use our judgment. He paused. But they won't get that close. Bomi nodded and went back to work. What Teo and his team were building, what they had been building for over a decade, quietly and without announcement, was not the only thing of its kind. Across Earth's 17 colonial systems, in facilities ranging from small research outposts to massive underground complexes, hundreds of similar projects existed. Each one had been developed independently, by different teams, working on different problems. Most of them had never met each other. A few didn't even know the others existed. This was also intentional. General Do-hyun had once explained the philosophy to a group of newly commissioned officers during a lecture that had gone completely unrecorded and unshared outside the room. The galaxy, he had said, watches what we announce. It watches what we publish. It watches our fleet movements and our trade agreements and our diplomatic statements. It does not watch what happens in quiet rooms by curious people who are simply trying to solve interesting problems. He had paused. We are a species of curious people. We have a lot of quiet rooms. That morning, as the Drenathi fleet held its position above Earth, and Admiral Kova waited for humanity's formal response, those quiet rooms were waking up one by one. And in the archive, 3 kilometers underground, Dr. Hana was compiling a second document. Not a research paper, not a biological study. A simple, clean summary, written in plain language, of every meaningful weakness, every tactical blind spot, every predictable behavior pattern, and every physiological vulnerability of every species in the fleet above. She titled it, "Everything They Should Have Learned About Us Before Doing This." She sent it to Do-hyun's office as well. His reply came back 4 minutes later. It was a single line. "Thank you. We won't need all of it, but it's good to have." Hana smiled, closed her screen, and went to make tea. The galaxy had spent 900 years assuming that humanity's silence meant they were comfortable, that peace had made them soft, that 9 centuries without a major war meant 9 centuries without preparation. What the galaxy had not considered was that humans had not been silent because they were comfortable. The 900-year peace is over. Galactic declare war. But humans just laugh. The ships appeared without warning. One moment the sky above Earth was clear, blue and ordinary, the way it had been for centuries. The next moment, it was gone. Not the sky itself, but the emptiness of it. Where there had been nothing, there were now thousands of vessels. Massive, dark, and silent. They stretched from horizon to horizon, blotting out the sun the way storm clouds do before a flood. But these were not clouds. These were warships, and they did not belong to humanity. In the United Earth Command Center deep beneath Seoul, alarms went off all at once. Screens lit up. Officers jumped from their chairs. Data poured in from every satellite, every deep space relay, every monitoring station humanity had quietly built over the past few hundred years. The numbers were staggering. Over 4,000 vessels, each one larger than anything Earth had ever constructed. Their energy signatures were off the charts. Their weapon systems were charged and ready. General Do-hyun was eating breakfast when the call came in. He was a tall man, not particularly loud or dramatic. He had short black hair going slightly gray at the sides, and the kind of calm face that made junior officers nervous, because they could never tell what he was thinking. He set down his coffee, wiped his mouth, and walked to the command center without rushing. When he stepped through the reinforced doors and saw the screens, he stood there for a moment and simply looked. His aide, Lieutenant Rena, was already at her station. She was younger, sharp-eyed, and rarely rattled. But even she looked tense that morning. She turned when she heard Do-hyun's footsteps. "Sir," she said. "The Drenathi Empire. Admiral Kova commanding. They're broadcasting on every frequency we have." "Play it," Do-hyun said. The face that appeared was not human. Admiral Kova of the Drenathi Empire had 4 eyes arranged in a wide arc across his broad, pale face. His skin had the texture of dry stone, and his voice, when he spoke, came out layered, like two voices talking at the same time, slightly out of sync with each other. "People of Earth," Kova began. He spoke in the galactic common tongue, which Earth's translation systems handled easily. "The Galactic Sovereign Council has convened and reached a unanimous decision. The 900-year peace treaty, signed in the year of the third stellar alignment, is hereby dissolved. Your colonial territories, all 17 systems claimed under the Human Expansion Acts, are to be surrendered in full within 72 hours. Any vessels found in most systems after that period will be destroyed. Any resistance will be met with total force. You have been warned." The broadcast ended. The command center was very quiet for a moment. Then General Do-hyun made a sound. It started small, just a short exhale through his nose. But then it grew, a low chuckle, slow and disbelieving, like a man who had just heard a joke he hadn't expected. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth and shook his head slightly. Rena stared at him. "Sir?" "Pull up their formation pattern," he said, still quietly laughing to himself. Rena hesitated, then brought it up on the secondary screen. The fleet positions appeared as a 3-dimensional map, thousands of glowing dots, arranged in sweeping arcs around Earth and its nearest systems. Do-hyun looked at it for a long moment. "Classic Drenathi pincer formation," he said. "They haven't changed it in 600 years. He pointed to a cluster of ships on the left flank. "Those are their command vessels. They always put them close to the front. They think it shows bravery. It doesn't. It makes them a priority target." Rena looked at the screen, then back at her general. "Sir, they have over 4,000 ships." "I know. They're fully armed." "I know. Should I begin emergency protocols?" Do-hyun finally stopped smiling. Not because he was worried, but because now he was thinking clearly and completely, and thinking was something he did with a still face. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly toward the center of the room, looking at each screen, one by one. "Get me Admiral Kova on an open channel," he said, "and wake up the colonial commanders, all 17 systems, right now. Tell them to activate Level 0 protocols." Rena blinked. "Level 0? Sir, that hasn't been used since the last time someone thought we were easy targets," Do-hyun said. "Yes, that's the one." Rena turned and began issuing orders. The room shifted around her. Voices picked up, hands moved faster, and the quiet tension transformed into something else entirely. Not panic, purpose. Across the 17 human colonial systems, lights came on in facilities that had not been opened in decades. Underground hangars unsealed, automated systems powered up from long, patient sleeps. Deep space arrays that had been disguised as weather stations and scientific relay points began rotating silently toward new coordinates. None of this was visible to the Drenathi fleet above. None of it was meant to be. Back on Earth, in cities across every continent, people had stepped outside and were staring at the sky. The warships were visible to the naked eye, dark shapes like shadows cast by something impossibly large. News broadcasts were running emergency alerts. Social feeds were exploding with footage, speculation, and fear. Billions of people watched the sky and held their breath. But in a small cafe 3 blocks from the command center, a group of off-duty engineers from the Earth Defense Research Division were also watching the broadcasts on a small screen mounted above the counter. When Admiral Kova's ultimatum played, one of them, a heavyset man named Teo, who designed fold space systems for a living, watched it calmly. Then he looked at his colleagues. Then he looked back at the screen. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that makes other people in the room turn and look at you. His colleague, Hana, a xenobiologist who had spent 30 years studying alien biology and psychology, covered her mouth with her hand, not in shock, but because she was also laughing, and trying not to show it. They really did it, Teo said, shaking his head. They actually declared war. Did they read anything about us before doing this? Anything at all? Teo leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Apparently not, because that was the thing the Drenathi Empire did not understand. That was the thing the entire Galactic Sovereign Council had failed to consider when they voted unanimously to dissolve the peace and send 4,000 ships to Earth's doorstep. Humanity had been quiet for 900 years. Humanity had signed the peace treaty and kept to it, built their colonies slowly, made no aggressive moves, and stayed mostly to themselves. But quiet was not the same as idle, and peaceful was not the same as unprepared. General Dahyun stood at the center of the command room, looking at the map of 4,000 enemy ships, and he was not afraid. He had read every report, signed off on every project, approved every budget, and personally reviewed the results of every test run conducted in the past 30 years. He knew exactly what humanity had built, while the galaxy was busy congratulating itself on 900 years of peace. He picked up the open channel to Admiral Kova. "Admiral," he said, his voice level and clear, "we received your message. We'll need some time to consider our response." He paused. "Don't go anywhere." He closed the channel. Rena looked at him. "Sir, what do we do now?" Do-hyun picked up his cold coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "Now," he said, "we show them what 900 years of patience looks like."